feeling about books and reading. So I'm pleased to be reading in this wonderful environment. An evening in Mercer House. He was tall, about 50, with darkly handsome, almost sinister features, a neatly trimmed mustache, hair turning silver at the temples, and eyes so black they were like the tinted windows of a sleek limousine. You could see out. He could see out, but you couldn't see in. We were sitting in the living room of his Victorian house. It was a mansion, really, with 15-foot ceilings, large, well-proportioned rooms. A graceful spiral stairway rose from the center hall toward a domed skylight. There was a ballroom on the second floor. It was Mercer House, one of the last of Savannah's great houses still in private hands. Together with the walled garden and the carriage house in back, it occupied an entire city block. And Mercer House was not quite the biggest private house in Savannah. It was certainly the most grandly furnished. Architectural Digest had devoted 6 pages to it. A book on the interiors of the great houses featured it alongside Sagamore Hill, Biltmore, and Chartwell. Mercer House was the envy of house-proud Savannah. Jim Williams lived in it alone. Williams was smoking a King Edward cigarillo. What I enjoy most, he said, is living like an aristocrat without the burden of having to be one. The blue bloods are so inbred and weak, all those generations of importance and grandeur to live up to. No wonder they lack ambition. I don't envy them. It's only the trappings of aristocracy that I find worthwhile. The fine furniture, the paintings, the silver, the very things they have to sell when the money runs out. And it always does. And all they're left with is their lovely memories. He spoke in a drawl as soft as velvet. The walls of his house were hung with portraits of European and American aristocrats by Gainsborough, Hudson, Reynolds, Whistler. The provenance of his possessions traced back to dukes, duchesses, kings, queens, czars, emperors, and dictators. Anyhow, he said, royalties better. Williams tapped a cigar ash into a silver ashtray. A dark gray tiger cat climbed up and settled in his lap. He stroked it gently. I know I'm apt to give the wrong impression living the way I do, but I'm not trying to fool anyone. Years ago, I was showing a group of visitors through the house and noticed one of the men giving his wife a high sign. I saw him mouth the words, "Oh, money." Oh. The man was David Howard, the world's leading expert in armorial Chinese porcelain. I took him aside afterwards and said, "Mr. Howard, I was born in Gordon, Georgia. That's a little town near Macon. The biggest thing in Gordon is a chalk mine. My father was a barber, and my mother worked as a secretary for the mine. My mummy, what there is of it, is about 11 years old." Well, the man was completely taken aback. "Do you know what made me think that you were from an old family?" he said. "Apart from the portraits and the antiques, those chairs over there. The needlework on the covers is unraveling. New money would mend it right away. Old money would leave it as it is. I know that," I told him. "Some of my best customers are old money." Williams had played an active role in the restoration of Savannah's historic districts, starting in the mid-1950s. Georgia Fawcett, a longtime preservationist, recalled how difficult it had been to get people involved in saving downtown Savannah in those early days. The old part of town had become a slum, she said. The banks had redlined the whole area. The great old houses were falling into ruin and were being demolished to make way for gas stations and parking lots, and you couldn't borrow money from any of the banks to go in and save them. Prostitutes strolled along the streets. Couples with children were afraid to live downtown because it was considered dangerous. Mrs. Fawcett had been a member of a small group of genteel preservationists who had tried since the 1930s to stave off gas stations and save the houses. "One thing we did do," she said, "we got the bachelor's interest." Jim Williams was one of the bachelors. He bought a row of one-story brick tenements on East Congress Street, restored the whole row, and sold it. Soon he was buying and restoring and selling houses dozens of houses all over the downtown. Stories in the newspapers drew attention to his restorations, and his antiques business grew. He started going to Europe once a year on buying trips. He was discovered by society hostesses. The improvement in Williams's fortunes paralleled the renaissance of Savannah's historic district. By the early 1970s, couples with children came back downtown, and the prostitutes moved over to Montgomery Street. Feeling flush, Williams bought Cabbage Island, one of the sea islands that form an archipelago along the Georgia coast. Cabbage Island was a folly. It covered 1,800 acres, and all but 5 of them lay underwater at high tide. He paid $5,000 for it in 1966. Old salts at the marina told him he'd been duped. Cabbage Island had been on the market for half that sum the year before. $5,000 was a lot of money for a soggy piece of real estate you couldn't even build a house on. But a few months later, phosphates were discovered under several coastal islands, including Cabbage Island. Williams sold out to Kerr McGee of Oklahoma for $600,000. Several property owners on neighboring islands laughed at him for jumping at the bait too quickly. They held out for a higher price. Weeks later, the state of Georgia outlawed drilling along the coast. The phosphate deal was dead. As it turned out, Williams was the only one who sold in time. His after-tax profit was $500,000. After that, he made more frequent trips to Europe, in style now on the QE2, and sent back whole container loads of important paintings and fine English furniture. His stature in Savannah, to the irritation of certain blue bloods, grew rapidly. How does it feel to be nouveau riche? He was asked on one occasion. It's the riche that counts. Having said that, he bought Mercer House. An early evening mist had turned the view of Monterey Square into a soft focus stage set with pink azaleas billowing beneath a tattered valance of live oaks and Spanish moss. The pale marble pedestal of the Pulaski Monument glowed hazily in the distance. A copy of the book, At Home in Savannah, Great Interiors, lay on Williams's coffee table. I had seen the same book on several other coffee tables in Savannah, but here the effect was surreal. The cover photograph was one of this very room. For the better part of an hour, Williams had taken me on a tour of Mercer House and his antique shop, which was quartered in the carriage house. In the ballroom, he played a pipe organ. First a piece by Bach, then I Got a Rhythm. Finally, to demonstrate the organ's deafening power, he played a passage from Trésor Frank's Pièce Héroïque. When my neighbors let the dogs howl all night, said Williams, this is what they get in return. In the dining room, he showed me his royal treasures, Queen Anne's silverware, the Duchess of Richmond's porcelain, and a silver service for 60 that had belonged to a Russian Grand Duke. The coat of arms from the door of Napoleon's coronation carriage hung on the wall in the study. Here and there around the house lay Fabergé objects, carriages, cigarette cases, ornaments, jewel boxes, the trappings of aristocracy, nobility, royalty. As we moved from room to room, tiny red lights flickered in electronic recognition of our presence. If there's a single trait common to all Savannahans, he said, it's their love of money and their unwillingness to spend it. Then who buys these high-priced antiques I just saw in your shop? I said. That's exactly my point, he said. People from out of town, Atlanta, New Orleans, New York. That's where I do most of my business. When I find an especially fine piece of furniture, I send a photograph of it to a New York dealer. I don't waste time trying to sell it here in Savannah. It's not that people in Savannah aren't rich, it's just that they're very cheap. I'll give you one example. There's a woman here, a grande dame, at the very apex of society, and one of the richest people in the Southeast, let alone Savannah. She owns a copper mine. She built a big house in an exclusive part of town, a replica of a famous Louisiana plantation house with huge white columns and curved stairs. You can see it from the water. Everybody goes, ooh, look, when they pass it. I adore her. She's been like a mother to me, but she's the cheapest who ever lived. Some years ago, she ordered a pair of iron gates for her house. They were designed and built especially for her. But when they were delivered, she pitched a fit, said they were horrible, said they were filth. Take them away, she said. I never want to see them again. Then she tore up the bill, which was for $1,400, a fair amount of money in those days. The foundry took the gates back, but they didn't know what to do with them. After all, there wasn't much demand for a pair of ornamental gates that exactly that size. The only thing she could do was to sell the iron for its scrap value. So they cut the price from $1,400 to $190, naturally, the following day. The woman sent a man over to the foundry with $190, and today, those gates are hanging on her gate post, where they were originally intended to go. That's pure Savannah. That's what I mean by cheap. You mustn't be taken in by the moonlight and magnolias. There's more to Savannah than that. Things can get very murky. William stroked his cap and tapped another ash into his ashtray. Williams picked up the decanter of Madeira and refilled our glasses. Drinking Madeira is a great Savannah ritual, you know. It's a celebration of failure, actually. The British sent whole shiploads of grapevines over from Madeira in the 18th century in hopes of turning Georgia into a wine-producing colony. Savannah's on the same latitude as Madeira. Well, the vines died, but Savannah never lost its taste for Madeira, or any other kind of liquor for that matter. Prohibition didn't even slow things down. Everybody had a way of getting liquor, even the old ladies, especially the old ladies. A bunch of them bought a Cuban rum runner and ran it back and forth between here and Cuba. William sipped his Madeira. One of those ladies died just a few months ago. Old Mrs. Morton. She was a marvel. She did exactly as she pleased all her life. God bless her. Her son came home for Christmas vacation one year and brought his college roommate with him. Mama and the college roommate fell in love. His roommate moved into the master bedroom with her. Daddy moved into the guest bedroom. And the son went back to college and never came home again. From then on, Mr. and Mrs. Morton and the roommate lived in that house under those conditions until the old man died. They kept up appearances and pretended nothing at all outrageous had happened. Mama's young lover, who served as her chauffeur, when he dropped her off and picked her up at her bridge parties, the other ladies would peer out at them through the Venetian blinds, but they never let on that they were interested because nobody ever mentioned his name in her presence. I told Williams that as I was coming up the walk earlier, I had heard the guide on one of the tour buses talking about this house. Bless their boring little hearts, said Williams. What did the guide say? She said that the house was the birthplace of famous songwriter Johnny Mercer, the man who wrote Moon River, I Want to Be Around, Too Marvelous for Words, and other standards. Wrong, but not completely off base, said Williams. What else? But last year, Jacqueline Onassis offered to buy the house and everything in it for $2 million. The guy gets C- for accuracy, said Williams, and now I'll tell you what really happened. Construction of the house was begun in the 1860s by the Confederate General Hugh Mercer, Johnny Mercer's great-grandfather. It was unfinished when the Civil War broke out, and after the war, General Mercer was imprisoned and tried for the murder of 2 Army deserters. He was eventually acquitted, largely on the testimony of his son, and released from jail a broken and very angry man. He sold the house and new owners completed. Williams leaned back and sent a thin stream of cigar smoke sealing work. I'll come to Jacqueline Onassis in a moment, he said. But first I want to let you know another piece of history that the tour guide never mentioned. It's an incident I call Flag Day. It happened a couple of years ago. He stood up and went over to the window. Monterey Square is lovely. He said, in my opinion, it's the most beautiful of all the 21 squares in Savannah. The architecture, the trees, the monument, the way it all fits together. Movie makers love it. Something like 20 feature films have been shot partially in Savannah in the past 6 years alone, and Monterey Square is one of their favorite shooting locations. Every time filming begins, this town goes wild. Everybody wants to be an extra and meet the stars and watch from the sidelines. The mayor and the city councilman think it's wonderful because the film companies will spend money here and Savannah will become famous, and that will help the tourism. But it really isn't so wonderful at all. The movie makers pay local extras the minimum wage, and Savannah doesn't get publicity after all because the audiences usually have the vaguest idea where the movies have been shot. In fact, the cost to Savannah turned out to be greater than the return. If you add up the overtime for sanitation men, police, and the disruption of traffic, the film crews are invariably rude. They leave piles of litter. They destroy shrubbery. They trample the grass. One crew even cut down a palm tree across the square because it didn't happen soon. Well, the rudest bunch of all came to town a couple of years ago. A film CBS made-for-TV movie about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. They selected Monterey Square for an important outdoor scene, but naturally we were not consulted. The night before filming was to begin, the police went around and abruptly ordered all of us to move our cars out of the square and not to enter or exit our houses between 10 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon. The film crews then dumped 8 truckloads of dirt onto the street and spread it around to make it look like the unpaved streets of 1865. The next morning, we woke to find the squares full of horses and wagons, ladies in hoop skirts, and a thick covering of dust over everything. It was intolerable. The cameras were in the middle of the square, aimed directly at this house. Several of my neighbors asked me, as founder and past president of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, to do something about it. I went out and asked the producers to make a $1,000 contribution to the Humane Society to show at least their good intentions. He said they would think it over and get back to me by noon. Noon came and went. The producer never responded. Instead, the cameras began to roll. I decided to ruin his shot. And this is how I did it. Williams opened a cabinet to the left of the window and took out a bolt of red cloth. So I decided to ruin their shot, and this is how I did it. Williams opened, with a snap of his wrist, he unfurled. It was an 8-foot Nazi banner. I draped this over the balcony outside the window, he said. He held up the banner so I could get a good look at it. Big black swastika against a circle of white on a field of bright red. I bet that stopped the shooting, I said. Yes, but only temporarily, he said. The cameraman switched to the other side of the house, so I moved the flag to the other window in the study. They eventually got the shot they wanted, but at least I made my point. Williams rolled up the banner and put it back in the cabinet. The furor it caused was something I hadn't expected. The Savannah Morning News splashed the story across its front pages, complete with photographs. They wrote vituperative editorials and published angry letters. The wire services picked up on it too. So did television network Whoop News. I found myself having to explain that no, I was not a Nazi, and that I'd used the flag to create a time warp in order to stop very inconsiderate filmmakers who were not Jewish so far as I know. But I did make one terrible oversight. I had forgotten that the Temple Mikveh Israel, the synagogue, was directly across the square. The rabbi wrote me a letter asking how I happened to have a Nazi flag handy. I wrote back saying my Uncle Jesse had brought it back as a trophy from the Second World War. I also told them I collected relics of all sorts of fallen empires, and that the flag and a few others, other from World War II, were part of that collection. Then I wasn't mistaken. I said, that was a Nazi dagger I saw on the table in the rear parlor. I have several, said Williams, plus a few sidearms and a hood ornament from Nazi staff car. That's about the extent of, however, the artifacts of Hitler's regime are not popular, but they do have historic value. Most people understand that and know that there was nothing political about my protest. The firestorm abated after a couple of weeks, but every so often I encountered a smoldering ember in the form of glaring eyes or people crossing the street to avoid me. But I gather you haven't been ostracized, I said. Not at all. 6 months after Flag Day, Jacqueline Onassis came to call. Williams crossed the room and lifted the lid of the slant-top desk. Twice a year, he said, Christie's auction has Fabergé sales in Geneva. Last year, the star item was in the sale was an exquisite jade box. It had been widely advertised, and there was a lot of excitement about it. The man in charge of those sales was Geza von Habsburg. He the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire today, if it still existed. Geza's a friend of mine. I've attended those sales for years. Naturally, I flew over for this one. When I said, Geza, I am here to buy that little box. Geza laughed and said, Jim, quite a number of people are here to buy that little box. I had visions of having to bid against Malcolm Forbes and his ilk, but I thought at least I'd have fun driving up the price. So I said, well, Geza, let's put it this way. If somebody outbids me and buys that box, they're going to buy, God knows they bought a box. Bidding started at the highest estimate. I finally bought the box for $70,000. Then I flew back over the Atlantic on Concorde and had a champagne cocktail with a little box sitting on my linen covered tray. The very next morning, I was down in my basement workshop restoring furniture, like jet-lagged and unshaven, when the doorbell rang. I sent one of my assistants, Berendt, up to answer it. He came running back downstairs, all out of breath, and said a tour guide was at the door, and you wanted to know if I would show Jacqueline Onassis through the house. I thought, this is a bunch of bull. But I came up anyway, and there was a tour guide, and indeed, she did have Mrs. Onassis waiting in the car. I asked her to drive around the block a few times, giving me a chance to shave and get the house pulled together. While she did that, I got myself ready and told the boys to do what we call a tour of homes lighting. It's a set routine that takes a full 10 minutes of turning on lamps, opening shutters, emptying ashtrays, clearing away newspapers. Just as we were finishing, the doorbell rang again, and there was Mrs. Onassis and her friend Morris Templeton. I'm awfully sorry I sent you away, I said, but I just got back last night from the Fabergé sale. Even with that, Mr. Templeton said, who bought the box? And I said, won't you come and see? Without another word, he took Mrs. Onassis by the arm and said, there it is. I told you we should have bought it. Williams handed me the box. It was a rich, deep green, about 4 inches wide, square. The top was covered with brilliant lattice work of diamonds, punctuated with cabochon rubies. In the center, a white oval enamel medallion bore the cipher of Nicholas II in diamonds and gold. They were in the house about an hour, said Williams. They looked at everything. We went upstairs and I played the pipe organ, and then we all played roulette. They were completely charming. Templeton had what I call a topside dye job. You take a man and dip him bottom side up in hair dye, and then stop right at the ears. He was an interesting man, very knowledgeable about antiques. In fact, they both were. They'd been traveling down the coast on his yacht, but Mrs. Onassis was very down to earth. She was wearing a white linen suit that didn't even bother brushing the dust off her chair when she sat down in the garden. She invited me to come visit her in her hovel the next time I came to New York. When they left, she asked how to get to the nearest Burger King. Well, what about offering to buy the house for $2 million, I asked. She did nothing as crass as that, but she apparently told Templeton in front of the tour guide, who reported her to the newspaper, of course, that she wished she could own Mercer House and everything in it. But not Jim Williams, she said. I couldn't afford him. I ran my hands over the Fabergé box. The lid swung smoothly on its hinges. The gold clasp fastened with a muted click. As I gazed at this dazzling object, I was only half aware of a key turning in the front door at Mercer House and of footsteps approaching in the entrance hall. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut the air. God damn it! Goddamn bitch! A blond boy stood in the doorway. He happened to be about 19 or 20. He was wearing blue jeans and a shirtless black t-shirt with the words, "Fuck you," printed in white across the front. He was trembling with barely controlled fury. His sapphire blue eyes were blazing. "What seems to be the problem, Dan?" Williams asked calmly without rising from his chair. Bonnie, goddamn bitch. She stood me up. She's running around all the South Side bars. Damn it, I ain't taking her shit no more. The boy grabbed a vodka bottle from the table and filled a crystal glass to the brim. He gulped it down. His arms were tattooed, a Confederate flag on one arm, a marijuana plant on the other. Get hold of yourself now, Danny, Williams said, speaking deliberately. Just tell me what happened. Maybe I was a few minutes late. I got thrown off of my timing. So what? Shit. Her girlfriend said she'd left because I wasn't there when I said I'd be. He glared at Williams. Give me $20. I need the money. I'm pissed off. What do you need it for? None of your goddamn business. I need to get fucked up tonight if you really want to know. That's what. I think you've already accomplished that, sport. I ain't anywhere near fucked up enough yet. Now, Danny, don't go doing that and driving your car. You get arrested for sure. You've already got charges against you from the last time, quote, you got, quote, fucked up, and they're really gonna nail you this time. I don't give a goddamn about you or Bonnie or the goddamn police. With that, the boy turned and abruptly left the room. The front door slammed. Outside, a car door opened and closed. A sharp, prolonged squeal of tires pierced the evening stillness. There was another squeal as the car rounded the corner of Montgomery Square, and then another as it turned again and sped down Bull Street. Then all was quiet. I'm sorry, said Williams. He got up and poured himself a drink, not Madeira this time, but straight vodka. Then silently, almost imperceptibly, he released a sigh and allowed his shoulders to relax. I looked down and I saw that I was still holding the Fabergé box. I was clutching it so tightly, I was afraid that for a moment I might have dislodged a jewel or two from the top. It seemed intact. I handed it back to Williams. That was Danny Hansford, he said. He works for me, part-time, refinishing furniture in my workshop. Williams studied the end of his cigar. He was calm, controlled. This is not the first time something like this has happened, he said. I have an idea how it will end. Later tonight, about 3:30, the telephone will ring. It'll be Danny, he'll be charming and sweet-natured. He'll say, hey Jim, this is Danny. I'm real sorry to wake you up. Boy, did I fuck up tonight. Man, did I make some big mistakes. And I'll say, well, Danny, what happened this time? And he'll say, I'm calling from the jailhouse. Yeah, they put me here again. I ain't done nothing wrong. I was just going down Abercorn Street to see if I could find Bonnie. And I burned a little rubber and turned right real quick. And there was a goddamn police car, blue lights flashing, sirens ready. And man, I'm in trouble. Hey, Jim, think you could come down and get me out? And I'll say, Danny, it's late. I'm tired of this. Why don't you just cool it and relax yourself tonight in jail? Now, Danny won't like this one bit, but he won't lose his cool. Not now. He'll keep it calm. He'll say, I know what you mean. You're right. I ought to stay here the rest of my goddamn life. It's been a messed up life anyhow. He'll be working on my sympathy now. It's okay, Jim, he'll say. Just leave me here. Don't worry about it. Hell, I don't even care. I hope I didn't get you upset. Hope you can get back to sleep tonight. See you later. Inside, Danny will be seething because I won't come right down there. He won't show it, though, because he knows I'm the only one who will help him. He knows I will call the bondsman and tell them to go out and go get him out, and they will. But I won't do that until morning, after the drugs have worn off. Williams gave no outward sign. He was at all embarrassed by the human tornado that had just passed through his house. Danny has two distinct personalities, he said. He can switch from one to the other like turning the pages of a book. Williams was speaking about Danny with calm detachment, just as he had spoken earlier about the Waterford crystal chandelier at the dining room, the portrait of Jeremiah Theus in the parlor. But he did not address the most curious question of all, Danny's presence in Mercer House, and the fact that he apparently had the run on it. The incongruity was startling. Perhaps it registered on my face. Because Williams offered something of an explanation. I have hypoglycemia, he said, and lately I've been blacking out. Danny stays here sometimes to babysit me when I'm not feeling well. It may have been the Madeira or the atmosphere of frankness that Williams had inspired with his stories. At any rate, I felt free to observe that blacking out alone might have been preferable to having this person running loose in the house. Williams laughed. Actually, I think Danny may be improving a little. Improving? Over what? 2 weeks ago we had a similar scene, but it ended a bit more dramatically. Danny was agitated that time because his best friend had made a disparaging remark about his car, and his girlfriend had refused to marry him. Danny came back to the house and carried on about it. Before I knew what was happening, he had stomped the small table, thrown a bronze lamp against the wall, and slammed a cut glass water pitcher on the floor with such force it made a permanent imprint on the hard pine floorboards. But he wasn't through yet. He took one of my German Lugers and fired a bullet into the floor upstairs. Then he ran out the front door and fired another shot into Monterey Square, trying to knock out a street lamp. Naturally, I called the police. When Danny heard the sirens, he tossed the gun into the bushes, ran indoors, flew upstairs, and jumped in bed with all his clothes on. The cops were no more than a minute behind him, but by the time they got upstairs, Danny was pretending to be asleep. When they woke him, he put on an act of confusion and denied he'd broken anything or shot any guns. But the police noticed tiny drops of blood on his arms where the little splinters of glass that had shot up when he smashed the picture on the floor. So they took him off to jail. I figured the longer they left him there, the madder he'd get. So the next morning, I dropped charges and got him out. I did not ask the obvious question. Why do you have anything to do with him? Instead, I asked the question of more immediate concern. You said Danny had fired one of your German Lugers. How many do you have? Several, said Williams. I need them for security. I'm here by myself a lot, and I had a couple of robberies. The second robbery was pulled off by a man who was armed with a submachine gun. And I was asleep upstairs at the time. That's when I installed the alarm system. It works fine when I'm out of the house or upstairs, but I can't throw the switch when I'm walking around down here on the main floor because it'll summon the police. So I keep pistols in strategic places. There's a Luger in the rear library, another in the desk drawer in my office, a third in the Irish linen press in the hall, and a Smith & Wesson in the living room. I've also got a shotgun and 3 or 4 rifles upstairs. The pistols are loaded. That's 4 loaded pistols, I said. Well, there's a risk, I know, but I'm a gambler. I have been all my life. You have to be if you deal in antiques and restore houses, go into debt for most of it as I have. But when I gamble, I know how to improve the odds. Come, I'll show you. Williams led me over to a small backgammon table. He removed the backgammon board but replaced it with another plain board lined with green felt. I believe in mind control, he said. I think you can influence events by mental concentration. I've invented a new game called Psycho Dice. It's very simple. You take 4 dice and call out 4 numbers between 1 and 6. For example, 4, a 3, and 2 6s. Then you throw the dice. And if any of the numbers come up, you leave those dice standing on the board. You continue till all the remaining dice continue to roll the remaining dice until all the dice are sitting on the board, showing your set of numbers. You're eliminated if you roll 3 times in succession without getting any of the numbers you need. The object is to get all 4 numbers in the fewest roll. Williams was sure he could improve the odds by sheer concentration. Dice have 6 sides, he said. So you have a 1 in 6 chance of getting your number when you throw the dice. If you do any better than that, you beat the law of averages. Concentration definitely helps. That's been proven. Back in the 1930s, Duke University did a study with a machine that could throw dice. First, they had it throw dice when nobody was in the building, and the numbers came up strictly according to the law of averages. Then they put a man in the next room and had him concentrate on various numbers to see if it would beat the odds. It did. Then they put him in the next room, in the same room, and had him concentrate on various numbers. Again, he beat the odds, but even by a wider margin. When the man rolled the dice himself using a cup, he did better. When he finally rolled the dice with his bare hands, he did best of all. From the few rounds we played, I could not say whether psychodives really worked. Williams had no doubt it did. He saw proof of it at every turn. When I needed a 5 and rolled 2, he proclaimed, "Aha, you know what's on the other side of the 2, don't you? 5. I could not let this pass. If we'd been betting, I said, I would have lost anyway, wouldn't I? Yes, but look how close you came. You see, the same concentration that makes psychodives work can make most things in life work. I've never been sick a day in my life, except for a common cold once in a while. I just can't be bothered. I don't have the time. Being sick is a luxury. I concentrate on being well. Danny didn't do more than let off steam tonight because I cooled him down. I was concentrating on that. I was tempted not to let that remark pass either, but it was late. I rose to leave. Isn't it possible that other people will turn their mental energy on you? I asked. They try to all the time, Williams said with a wry smile. I'm told a lot of people pray fervently night after night that I'll invite them to my Christmas parties. I can understand that, I said. From what I've heard, it's the best party in Savannah. I'll invite you to the next one, and you can judge for yourself. Williams fixed me with an impenetrable look. You know, I have 2 Christmas parties, not just one. Both are black tie. The first party is the famous one. It's the one that gets written up in the newspaper, the one the high and mighty of Savannah come to. The second party is the next night. It's the one the papers never write about. It's for gentlemen only. Which party would you like to be invited to? The one, I said, least likely to involve gunfire.